welcome everybody to our first ever Disability Horizons digital panel. Seems like the tech's working, which is always the big one. So we're on to a winner already. Very excited to have some amazing guests on the show. We'll call it a show, I think, on the show today. Obviously, the topic is all going to be about air travel. And there's an article and a press release that is supporting this panel. I've got a couple of stats that came out of our research just to mention. One of them was that 46% of our respondents who have not flown in the past 5 years say it is because it is too much hassle. So I think that's a big thing to kick off really, about how many disabled people are not flying who would really like to, but have felt it's difficult. And I'm sure you've all got different takes and perspectives on it.
Yeah, that's a good stat, actually, Martin. It's something that is very valuable. Difficult to evaluate, really.
Yeah, exactly. Well, look, so let's dive into it. So, Chris, if you start sort of, be great just to give a little bit for anyone watching, listening that hasn't come across your work before. What's your connection to air travel, and then just give us a couple of starters for 10, if that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, I started about 4 years ago after a terrible flight with my daughter and another one with my son just a few months later. And I simply went on the internet and asked why we can't take someone in a wheelchair on an aircraft in their own chair. And fast forward that to 4 years, and with the help of, I've got to mention Roberto, because he was one of my first calls, as was Graham. And a first call, I never understand it. He was drunken Italian talking to me. So, however, he's given me some great pointers as to where to go. And obviously yourself, Martin, who I've known anyway. So, and we've become closer, and it's good to get your spin on this. And I know you've had a really tough time the last few months in your own air travel. I think in the last 3 or 4 years, though, there's been a spike in a mood of change. Not only with the CAA rating airports and social media playing its part when it all goes wrong, and they're not always true. So for me, it's now become almost a life project now to get this wheelchair in the aircraft and see if we can just make it flying for all, basically.
So that's for really the big thing for you, Chris, is about how and if and when the wheelchair can be on the plane so the person can stay in it, not it going in the hold, correct?
Absolutely correct. There's 2 projects. One is getting that wheelchair inside the hold, and the other project is seeing if we can make those wheelchairs that have to go in the hold more secure, and that would be tie downs, or it will be boxes that they can sit in. But I suspect that's mostly manual chairs. Most people would rather sit in their own chair, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah, personal experience would concur with that. So we'll come back to you in a minute, Chris. I thought we'd move to thank you for that, and carry on. I was thinking, just as a latest news element, really, you've had a pretty bad experience in the last week, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, so I travelled a week or so ago. I think you're probably all quite aware of what happened. It was one of those things that Chris was mentioning that did blow up on social media. And I think just because I was very honest about it. Now the problem in this case wasn't necessarily the lack of accessible infrastructure or facilities, although that obviously plays its part, but the problem was lack of training. And really just a lack of customer service, human empathy at the end of the day. I was treated very much like an inconvenience.
Just so anyone, a bit like with Chris, anyone watching, listening that hasn't come across, I'm sure most have come across your work, but what's your day-to-day job and general involvement with tourism?
Yeah, of course. So again, I've got a couple of different angles there. So I've been working in accessible tourism for over 14 years. I am a disabled traveller. I'm a wheelchair user. I write a blog about my experiences of accessible travel, and my day job is marketing manager at a company called Accessable, who provide detailed access guides of physical venues, and we work with some of the airports across the UK to provide really detailed information about the accessible facilities there.
Perfect, thank you, Carrie Ann. So Josh, we'll come on to you next. Great just to summarise your personal experience of air travel, but obviously the business that you've built, the product you've produced as a way of trying to help people flying at the moment as well.
Sure. So I'm Josh. I'm 26 now. I've got spinal muscular atrophy, similar to the same as Martin actually. Electric wheelchair user, and I've been flying since I was a young lad. And as I've got older, obviously with the condition, we've become more immobile, which makes transferring a lot more difficult from the chair. And it kind of struck me a couple of years ago, from my own experience, how undignified it was getting from the chair onto the aircraft. And it was kind of frustrating. And then there was that realization moment of, actually, maybe there's something that we can have immediately that could sort of benefit some wheelchair users to kind of get over that issue of boarding the aircraft. And so then obviously we came up with the idea of, it's a sling and a seat, with the idea of having cushioning to keep you for some more comfortable whilst you're on the aisle chair, when you're transferring onto the aircraft, but then whilst you're on board the aircraft, having the padding underneath you. So essentially it's just a transferring device with some cushioning, and it's a very simple solution that's very effective currently at the moment, and there's nothing really out there that kind of does what we do at the moment. And I've been working with Chris. I met Chris and Graham a couple of years ago at the NEC. And both of them have been very helpful in pointing me in the right direction of the people that we need to work with, which has been fantastic. And it's just kind of come on leaps and bounds in the last sort of couple of years, really, Martin. So that from my own experience as a wheelchair user, it's frustrating, but I think depending on people's experiences, it's understandable why people don't fly. Absolutely. But I want to try and encourage as many people to continue as flying, despite some of the challenges that we do face.
Yeah, thank you for that, Josh. Obviously, I had one of those irony things that I used that you'll see this summer, and so I was way more comfortable on the aisle chair, way more comfortable on the plane, but then unfortunately had more issues than I've known, totally unrelated to the seat, but just to other issues. And so the actual seat was a proven thing there, that it really did. I didn't get a dead leg as I have done for the previous 20 years while sat on the plane. That was really welcomed.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to recognise that within aviation, the rules around manual handling compared with, for instance, the care setting is totally different. And we encourage the use of passengers using hoists because it's safer. That's a fact. But that there's an inherent issue when you arrive at airports that don't have equipment or appropriate equipment to transfer you off the plane, where it resorts to physically manual handling people. And that's kind of where we come in to offer that sort of extra level of reassurance and safety when you get to an airport available. So I think that's what makes us pretty unique.
Cool, thank you. So Roberto, the godfather of accessible air travel.
The godfather, love it.
That's your new title, by the way. I'd love to get your take on what the others have already mentioned. I think, from a rights perspective, I'd be very keen for anyone watching for you to enlighten a lot of people where we are at the moment with the rights level, if that's okay.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the new title. I will cherish that. I will use it on my social media from now on. I have to say, first of all, congratulations to Josh for the recent agreement with EasyJet. This is a very important step in the right direction, and I think more airlines should join EasyJet in this effort to make air travel easier for people who really need assistance. Where we are today, going back to what Carrie-Anne said, I think we are in a place where there is a clear divide between process and policy. Now, there is a belief, a wrong belief, that accessible air travel is about process. It's about policy first. And why do I say that? Carrie Ann said it's about training. I would like to politely disagree with that, in the sense that we're all different. Us human beings, we're all different. Some of us have gifts that others don't have. And unfortunately, when it comes to assistance at airports, there is a race to the bottom in terms of costs. And therefore, the wages offered to agents are not attractive for people that could really make a difference in terms of empathy, in terms of care. If you see airports that spend a little bit more in terms of assistance, and I would like to mention one above all, Copenhagen, you will see that their service provider comes from the care industry. Everybody, every agent is trained from a care background. It doesn't mean to go in the medical model of disability. It means that persons that require greater assistance will receive the right assistance and in the right way. So, and that is not process, that is policy. Mm-hmm. So once we understand, the community understands, the industry understands, airports, airlines together, that the right type of assistance is required, then they have to make policy in order to make sure that this happens. There is also another issue. There is the widespread belief that persons with disabilities travel more. I don't think that is correct. A recent case study, a proof of concept ran by British Airways in cooperation with Heathrow Airport last April, showed that from certain outstations, point of origin, coming into Heathrow, people were booking disability assistance for reasons that had nothing to do with disability. In fact, from one particular station, where they have flights with 20, 25 people booking assistance per flight, each and every person that arrived, that was canvassed and surveyed, stated they did not have a disability. All they needed was help with their hand luggage, because in that instance, British Airways has a very generous cabin luggage allowance, 23 kilos. And of course, if you're over 60 and you arrive at a large airport like Heathrow is, and you have to drag 23 kilos through the airport, it can be cumbersome. But then again, they're booking disability assistance, wheelchairs, for help with hand luggage. In other cases, it's about wayfinding. People that are connecting and that do not know how to move about the airport because they don't speak the language or because they're illiterate. Because in particular from the Indian subcontinent, there are constant migration flows from India to Canada and the United States. And these are the elderly that go visit their offsprings who made a new living in those countries. And they're illiterate. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. But of course, you can have the best way finding in the world, but if I cannot read it, it's pointless and useless to me. So they book wheelchair assistance without the need for a wheelchair, but just because they have to move about here.
Okay.
So it's about meeting the needs of the traveling public. I would like to extend this, not just persons with disabilities, but the traveling public. And so that we can ensure, policy-wise, that persons with disabilities have the right type of assistance.
Mm. Yeah, I totally understand. In the end, it comes down to customer service, doesn't it? And whether it's a person with a disability or without a disability, the policy should be able to cope with all customers and provide the best possible service for all customers.
Having read through Carrie Ann's little tweet, it's pointedly at the OmniServe, unfortunately, in this case, but reading that is just awful for anybody that's having to deal with that. Yes, training and
I do think it does come down to training in one instance. I mean, having had two very different experiences within a week of each other, from my external flight being very, very difficult. Coming back, you know, my experience at Faro Airport on the way home was a world away from what I experienced at Liverpool John Lennon flying out. Was empathetic, was caring, was to the point that I was like delighted. And I thought, why should I feel grateful for receiving good service? You know, I shouldn't, this should be an everyday thing. I shouldn't feel grateful for receiving the service that okay, yeah, I take Roberta's point about costs and all of that sort of thing, but you know, as I said earlier, I've paid for my ticket just like everybody else has.
Because what I just took from Roberto's point really hit something home for me actually, was that if there isn't enough funding to pay people to reward them for doing a really good job, you're going to get types of people that with all the training in the world, they're still not going to be able to be that empathetic provider that we need. So I think you're right that training is important, but recruiting the right kind of people that can benefit from the training is almost the first step, and then the training comes afterwards.
And I think the other point that I would like to raise on this is a point of cultural differences. You know, we are often travelling internationally, and what we experience from one country to the next can be very different, sometimes because of how disabled people are perceived in that culture. You know, earlier this year, I had a very bad experience flying out of Bordeaux Airport, simply because, you know, I wanted to pass through the airport independently and then be assisted onto the plane, which is how I always travel. And I was simply told that I wasn't allowed to do that. It was forbidden. It was not permitted. I had to sit and wait for the assistance providers to come and get me in the designated area. And I spent an hour there. I couldn't go to the bathroom. I couldn't get any food or drink. And when I raised this issue with the people at that airport, it simply wasn't seen as an issue, because that's how they treat disabled people there. This is what always happens.
So I think that there's a lot of stats come out of the research. I'd point everyone watching this to go and have a look if they want to get a handle on some of the stats from the research. There's some anecdotes, and I think the point is there's a million experiences that have been quite essentially crap over recent time for disabled passengers. And we could definitely go into lots of detail, but we're just not going to have time. What I'd like to ask all of you, I think we'll do it as one question. We'll all go round, and then I think that will probably bring us to about the end of the time that we've got. Is on a bigger level, it'd be interesting to ponder what is it disabled people as a community could be doing in a more cohesive way. So bringing together, like your story, Carrie Ann, my story, Josh's stories, all the millions of others, ways that we can bring that voice together. But also, and I know a few of you already work with industry as well, but what is it that industry are trying to do or need to do? So it's basically looking at the disability side and the industry side. Just any thoughts you've all got on that bigger moving it forward solution level, rather than the sort of minutiae of the specific problems that are faced every day. I was going to say, Josh, do you want to kick off with that?
Sure. To be honest, from experience, or my own personal experience working with industry, it's all about trying to, get yourselves into the frame of mind of the airlines and the airports and what they do to provide a service. And the more you work from your perspective as a disabled person and air your views to them and work with them to try and solve the problems, the more likely we are to get things done. And I think it's trying to keep that in mind. There is a lot of frustration for all the right reasons, and I think it's just having that in the back of your mind. Just work in the best possible way with the airlines and the airports, and that's worked quite well. And I'm sure maybe Chris and Roberta, you probably have a similar view on that as well, maybe.
Roberto, do you want to go next?
You know, I think these are golden times in the sense, of course, there's a lot that needs to be fixed, but at the same time, there is a lot of attention from industry, attention that wasn't there before, wasn't there a year ago, 2 years ago. For instance, I'm absolutely delighted to support the IATA Global Accessibility Symposium in Dubai next month. Reduced Mobility Right is one of the two disability organizations supporting that event. And it was unthinkable just a year ago that the airline association would would really put together an event focused on accessibility. So we are going in the right direction. I think it's like my ancestors, the Latins used to say, it's a do des. It's a give and take. We have to help industry get better, but at the same time, we have to help industry make sure that services remain financially sustainable in the long term. And I go back again with this wide interpretation of disability that is not current because it's not meeting the needs. So we have large numbers of people that are using services that are tailored for persons with disabilities for reasons that have nothing to do with disability. And we have to help industry craft policy and processes to help to support these people without taking away what has to be there for persons, for disabled people to travel.
Can I just jump in on that, Roberto? This global event going on with IATA, can we shed some light for the wider people in terms of potentially the importance for almost a global framework that could be set up to sort of overcome these barriers disabled users face when they're going to different countries where, like Carrie said, where the cultural differences are causing some issues, and maybe by having a framework in place at that much higher level could potentially solve some of these problems that passengers are facing?
Well, Josh, I am fully supportive of IATA's quest for alignment, for regulatory alignment, global regulatory alignment. What we need to do is to, but it goes deeper than that. Now, ICAO, a first step is coming from ICAO. ICAO is the organization of the United Nations of civil aviation authorities globally. And they're taking steps to separate accessibility from facilitation because they're two completely different things. Facilitation touches just about everything, but it's about the ease of travel, whereby accessibility is focused on making sure the travel is accessible. So that is already a step in the right direction, and I know that people are pushing in this direction, and it's going to see, but it's going to require time, and it's going to require political will. You have the Americans that have created the ACAA. In some respect, the ACAA was the first framework in the 90s. In some respect, the ACAA is good because it's very specific to the do's and don'ts for operators. But in other respect, because it's based on process and not policy, it becomes like a tick box exercise. So an operator, I have done that, so I'm compliant. Well, being compliant isn't the point. Delivering service is the point.
Yeah, so some more proactivity than reactivity.
Yeah.
Cool. Chris, what are
Can
your
I just
thoughts?
go one second,
go,
because
Roberto. Yep.
the cultural divide keeps coming up, and I remember in 2013 I ran a study for the European Commission on this. And one of the funny things that came up is the perception of quality of service. Like Carrie-Anne mentioned and Josh mentioned, I like to use this example. I have passenger A that leaves Frankfurt in Germany, where they have perfect hardware, everything is fine. But Germans are not people's person, so they tend to be a bit colder. So the perception is good. I had good service. Everything was fine. Then you arrive in Barcelona, where the wheelchair is falling apart, the airport is falling apart, but the agent is so engaging and so empathic that, it was a disaster. The wheelchair lost a wheel. By God, they were so good. It was an excellent.
That's so true.
Yeah.
So the human aspect, is the one that determines the perception of the quality of service.
Absolutely.
Not the actual quality of service.
Yeah, that's a very good point now. Yeah, thank you for that, Roberto. Okay, Chris, what are your thoughts on solutions and how the disabled community and industry can be one harmonious, ideal world?
I think I concur with Roberto and all of that stuff, and he's the one that moves in these political circles. And as IATA doing that conference in Dubai in November is a real kind of milestone. I wouldn't entertain us a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, and now we have them on board. And I think Roberto would say it's better to be in there than be on the outside bashing, be inside and start moving that legislation. And of course, they want to bring harmonisation, is their words, and also dignity. So, we know that very easily. And there's an element of compliance and also the culture of, of the whole industry is not like land and sea. So to that extent, it's very different. However, the other things, when we all want wheelchairs inside the cabin, the reality is there's no solution. There's nothing we can look at and go, this is the same. There's a whole load of compliance to go through. There's Part 21J we've got to look at. There's a whole ream of paperwork that will follow anything that we can do to facilitate. And that's essentially what I'm starting to do. So a bit like the Lion King is, when you hang on the edge of a cliff and show that little CAD design of this is how a wheelchair will go inside the aircraft. And I'd like to think that there are some airlines who go, yeah, we like that. We're going to look at that and try and get that on board. But more importantly, what Roberto's doing with legislation, and to a certain extent me in the UK with our government, is they'll turn around and say, well, now you've got no excuse not to do this. The solution is there. It's compliant. It's regulatory compliant. And it's safety compliant. You've got no reason now not to do this. And until you have that, we've got nothing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what jumped out, I mean, you all know I've been becoming more and more of an advocate around the purple pound stuff. And I think for me, it's just that simplicity that when you view disabled people as a consumer group, eventually there will be a company like an airline that see that it's worth trying to go through the red tape and the difficulties, because it will give them that uniqueness and that way of serving a whole market that is totally pissed off at the moment with the service. And that could be on a basic bottom line profit level, another way of moving in the right direction.
Yeah,
Martin, can I interrupt you on that? Sorry, can I interrupt you on that?
Yeah.
On the business case, there is a strong and demonstrated business case about getting it right, the importance of getting it right. And I go back to EasyJet. EasyJet carries in excess of 500,000 persons with disabilities every year. The appreciation for the service, how they rate service, good or very good, is 13 points higher than mainstream passengers. But that, importantly, translates into higher fidelization rates, which means percentages. So 95% of all the people that have rated their experience with the airline, good or very good, will use the airline again in the future. As we know, persons with disabilities, sometimes they travel alone, but most of the times they don't. If I take my son, for instance, we usually travel, me, my wife, and my son. So if I know that an airline will provide a very good level of service, I will stick to that airline. So fidelization is the reward at the end of the effort, for the effort.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, brilliant. So Carrie-Anne, paint us a picture.
I think, I think that's an interesting point that Roberto's just raised, because actually what we do at Accessable, although it's slightly different in that it's built environment and physical venues, so it's airports rather than airlines. But what we do is to try and support and encourage people to, if they want to, get out of their comfort zone and not always stick with what you know. You and I, and I'm sure Josh as well, Martin, will know that, as Roberto said, once we go somewhere and we find that it works well for our impairments, or we use a company who serves us really well, we don't tend to deviate from that because it's safe, and we know it works well, and sometimes the risk of doing something else, going somewhere new, feels like it might outweigh the benefit. Yeah, and this level of information is very detailed. It's all individually checked by a trained surveyor. It's as reliable as we can allow it to be. And airports are like our biggest referrers in terms of the traffic that comes to our website from our airport clients. They're at like numbers 2 and 3 in terms of the top referrers that we have. And they're the second most requested category of venue from our users. So clearly, this is information that people need. And I think, obviously it doesn't get around the problems that I've faced, because the problems that I've faced are about humans and are not necessarily about infrastructure. Though, as I said earlier, one feeds the other. Had the environment been more accessible, I may not have needed the level of service that then fell down. So yeah, I think it's about being transparent, really. I think it's about saying, being honest about what facilities are and are not available, and managing that expectation in that way. When I posted on Twitter about my experiences, and I will say that it's not usually a tactic that I employ. I don't generally like to talk about negativity in accessibility very much. And I think you know me well enough, Martin. I think we're sort of on the same page there. But I think you'll agree that sometimes when these experiences happen that just affect us so deeply, we feel a need to just do something about it, to just have an outlet and be honest with people and let them know that this is happening.
Yeah.
I did read that, Kerry-Ann, and I have to applaud you, because you did the tweets in a very journalistic head-on rather than an angry head. In other words, this is what happened, this is the story, and it wasn't so much of a blame on there, although it's clearly obvious what it is, but I thought it was very pragmatic, the way you dealt with it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, the thing there was, I gave myself a few hours. I let the experience happen. I gave myself a few hours to process it and calm down, and then just got it out there. But as I say, it's not. What made me very sad was the amount of responses that I received from people who said, "This is why I won't fly. This is why I won't travel by air." And that I don't want to encourage that. I don't want to encourage people to feel like that. So I think overall for me the tactic is honesty, both from the point of view as us as disabled travellers. I think we need to be honest about our experiences to try and improve the experience for others. And I think the operators, the airlines and the airports need to be very honest about their facilities, and what they can and can't do to support us to manage expectation.
I think Martin, you opened the question is, what can the community do? And that's a very difficult one, but it's an old school one, and that is to communicate with airports and airlines when it goes wrong. And I know it's a pain in the neck, but more importantly, get those communications into government and make sure their inbox is so high it's continually high, so that they can actually start. Well, they are doing it, but just keep that momentum going, and especially in the current political climate where everything is being swept under the carpet. But there are people at the DFT, the ODI, and so forth that read these letters and the emails, and we just got to keep that momentum, keeping their inbox full.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's also important to highlight good experiences as well.
Absolutely.
And this is not just to do window dressing for operators, but it is to prove the fact that it's true for some people do have a bad experience, But it's also true that a lot more travel without problem. And sometimes they get exceptional service like you had on your inbound. And it's good to speak about those things too, because otherwise we keep putting out a negative message, and a negative message isn't going anywhere. We have to be, well, when you said, when you, Carrie-Anne, talked about honesty, it's important to be honest across the board. So honest when things go wrong and honest when things go right.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, I can go with that too. In fact, we do see more of that now on social media when someone does put something that's good. John Morris is a good example over in the States, and he often puts when it's as much as he puts when it's bad, he absolutely compliments the service and the airline when it goes right for him.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of the things I wanted to address was the use of social media. I think we've sort of ticked that off, that it's a great vehicle for having a voice, whether that be good, bad, or indifferent, that it's great just to keep the conversation going and keep the awareness raising going, so that, in the end, these things can be improved.
I think Chris's point's right, though. It's all good putting stuff on social media, the good or bad, but does anything really happen until you actually put messages into governments and the airlines and stuff like that? I know.
Yeah, the official ones.
Yeah, and in fairness, take your hat off to some of the airlines where they do now have a very active presence on social media. And if they see good or bad comments, they tend to pick it up pretty quickly and will chat with you. So, I think from that side as well, I would encourage some airlines that maybe aren't so active to remain or to start, being more active online potentially as well.
Yeah, we've also got to look out for those people that actually, let's say, get it wrong, and they're blaming the wrong people because mud sticks, and there's classic examples of where people have a booked assistance and they just go for it and they get it all wrong. Now that doesn't, I'm saying this kind of wrong really, but what I'm trying to say is there are those people out there that will use the social media platform for anything. It could be really small, and me, when I travel through an airport, I get things wrong occasionally. Running to a gate is a good one, but not everybody can do that. But we've just got to, and I've seen a few in my own box where people have complained about something, and I thought, that's not the airline, that's not the airport, that's you. And I won't go into those, but it's clearly them, and they're angry.
Do we think sometimes some disabled passengers don't sometimes understand where some responsibility lies between the airlines and the airports in terms of when things might go wrong or get broken? Is there a piece where there needs to be slightly more education into the disabled community about that? Because I sometimes see reviews where people are blaming maybe the airline for the service when it's not the airline's fault. It might be the ground handlers, it could be a service provider. Sometimes I see that, and I don't know how the airlines might perceive that.
I think that's a really interesting one, but I think actually from the point of view of the wider public, who are perhaps worried about their equipment getting damaged or whatever, they're not actually that concerned about whose fault it is. They just don't want it to happen.
Of course, yeah.
Right, guys. Well, listen, thank you for your time today. I mean, obviously, we just can't cover everything, but I think it's great to have this snapshot in time from the survey with the stats that came out, and just us bounding around ideas and just trying to create new ideas and conversations going. And congratulations to all you with the work you're doing every day to try and make air travel more accessible as we go into the future.